So, when Pathfinder 2e launched in 2019, Paizo included character retraining rules in the base edition of this game. Now, there are some pros and cons to this decision by Paizo. On the pros side of the equation, character retraining allows you to effectively and quickly address a situation where the life choices that your character has made have proven to be ill-adapted to whatever adventure has been thrown their way. The character can quickly and easily trade out unneeded character options for skills that are far more appropriate to the challenges that they face. On the con side of the equation, however, this reminds me just a little bit too much of my college experience. Paizo, I did not want this much realism for my fantasy RPGs. Today, we're going to talk about the rest and retraining rules for Downtime Mode in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who has an important question that I need to ask Paizo. Does an oceanfront beach chair count as a secure and comfortable location for purposes of getting the improved rest benefits in Downtime Mode? If it doesn't, it should. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And welcome back to Storytelling in Pathfinder 2e, a series where we take a look at the tips, tricks, and advice that Paizo offers game masters so that they can experience more success at their gaming table. Now, recently we've dived into the third mode of play in Pathfinder 2e, which is Downtime Mode, and today we're going to start taking a look at some of the specific activities that characters can take advantage of during Downtime Mode. We're going to talk about their impact on the story, and what sort of things game masters should think about when they include these elements in their stories. In specific today, we're going to talk about the R&R of Downtime Mode, rest and retraining. But before we dive into all of that, I would like to offer a very special thank you to Ashirion, one of the viewers of this channel. So recently, Ashirion gifted me this really cool hand-painted Cthulhu miniature. This thing looks amazing. It was a really awesome gift, and I just wanted to say, Ash, thank you so much. I really appreciate this, and I have already figured out exactly how I'm going to be using this against my players in my home game. Fantastic gift. And I guess that makes for a nice segue into the YouTube stuff. If you enjoy this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And most importantly, join in the conversation in the comments section down below. I love to hear the thoughts and insights that you all offer for these conversations. If you're interested in being a part of the Disaster Tour Guide community, you can check out my free Discord group, or you can support the channel financially by checking out my Patreon page. Both of those are linked in the video description as well. And while we're at it, let me give a quick shout out and thank you to the sponsor of this week's video. So I want to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of today's video, ArcKnight. ArcKnight is a Texas-based company that makes beautiful and durable die-cut plastic accessories for TTRPGs, such as flat plastic minis, object sheets, spell templates, and the number one reason they keep getting a lot of my money, RPG maps. ArcKnight sells a number of double-sided map packs that you can use for your TTRPGs that come with different themes such as wilderness or planar settings, or as you can see here, the Greystone Castle pack. Let's bust out these maps on the table and show you what they look like. So really quick, I'm going to show you one of the sample layouts that they give you for the Greystone Citadel. As you can see here, you have a moat and an entrance area. You have some basic fortifications for the castle, and even a throne room for your players to enter. Now the next thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to step back a bit. This is one of my old RPG maps, and you see the standard folds, crinkles, creases, and other wear and tear that is associated with your standard RPG map. But as you can see, my maps from ArcKnight are actually much flatter and in better condition, and the reason is these maps don't fold, they just store as is. This leads to a more durable product that gets less wear and tear as it ages. Also, I would like to zoom in and show you something really cool about ArcKnight's maps. As you can see here, I am one of those weird storytellers that likes to use hex grids instead of square grids. And the cool thing about ArcKnight's maps is you can custom order these maps in whatever type of grid you prefer. Do you prefer the normal square grids? You can order it that way. Do you want to custom order all of their maps with hex grids like I did? That's a possibility. And even though I don't have an example here, you can also order their maps completely gridless if that's your preferred playstyle. And to give you one more sample of what ArcKnight maps look like, here is a recent construction that I used in one of my games to create a tavern for my players to explore. As you can see, the map is colorful, has light sources indicated, and once again, allow me to point out that they allowed me to order it with a custom hex grid to fit my group's gaming style. So that's just a sample of the many different maps that ArcKnight offers. I love that these maps are beautiful, that they're durable, and very easy to store. These simple plastic sleeves tuck very neatly beside my computer desk and are very easy to store and access for my games. I really appreciate the fact that ArcKnight develops products that are easy to store as a game master, meaning that I have more room for, well, all of the other stuff in my gaming space. One last thing I'd like to say about ArcKnight is the incredible respect that I have for their team. I have been a customer of ArcKnight for years, backing many of their Kickstarters, even talking to them at Gen Con, and I have placed many orders with this company. And on the single occasion that there was an error with one of my orders, their customer service team worked quickly and efficiently to get that order fixed and sent back out to me. I'm impressed by their professionalism and by the quality of products and services they provide. So if you want to check them out, I encourage you to check out the link to their website in the video description. And thank you again, ArcKnight, for sponsoring this video. By the way, the content from today's video comes from both the core rulebook and the Game Mastery Guide. In the core rulebook, you'll want to check out pages 236, 481, and 502. And in the Game Mastery Guide, you can find some information on this topic on page 26. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be talking about the R&R of Downtime Mode, Rest and Retraining. And if I'm being honest, the majority of this video is going to be on retraining rules. The rules for resting are actually pretty simple, so let's knock those out really quick. When you think about long-term rest during Downtime Mode, there are two basic rules that you want to be aware of. The first one is this: if a character spends 24 hours resting in a secure and comfortable location, they will gain double the healing benefit of the normal 8-hour rest that a character could take. So basically, if a character spends all day in bed simply resting and recovering, they are going to heal twice as fast as they normally would. In addition to this, Paizo notes that any character, no matter how badly injured, should normally be able to recover to their full functionality in a time span ranging from a few days to possibly a week. So regardless of the actual healing rate that a character might possess, by the end of a week's downtime simply resting, that character should be back to normal. It doesn't matter if your level 20 fighter got beat down to a single hit point remaining in their battle with Destructo the Worldbreaker. After a week's rest, that character will have some cool scars and some cool stories, but they will also have all of their HP and be ready to get back into the action. And those are kind of the two main rules that come with long-term rest. 24 hours of rest will double the base amount of healing, and a few days to a full week should allow any character to get back to their full maximum. Now, there are some obvious exceptions to these particular rules, and that would be characters that are suffering under a disease or a poison or a curse or some similar effect that would prevent them from healing normally. Now, we're not going to go over long-term care for diseases and poisons or managing curses and things like that in this video. There is going to be a separate video in this series where we're going to talk about downtime activities and long-term skill checks. So we will be revisiting this topic later, but for now, know that base healing is relatively quick, and Paizo does this deliberately because they want players to get back into the action relatively quickly. If there is not an extreme circumstance preventing the healing, most characters should recover relatively swiftly, and the game should continue without too much interruption. But with the resting rules out of the way, now it's time to dive into a little bit of a heavier topic, and that is the subject of retraining. As I've mentioned, Paizo has built character retraining rules into the base rules of Pathfinder 2e. And I do think this is important for storytellers to recognize. Paizo intends for players as a base part of the game to be able to switch out character choices and character options when it would be to their benefit to do so. The character retraining rules that Paizo gives us are, I think, relatively generous and intended to give some flexibility to players. That is an assumption built into the game, and I think it's an assumption that storytellers should work to be comfortable with. I've played a lot of RPGs over the years, and I can tell you that character retraining rules are relatively rare, and a system that has retraining rules built right into the core of the game is even rarer. But ultimately, I think this is a good design decision by Paizo. It allows players to experience more of the game by using more of the content that Paizo has made available. It allows characters to recover from bad choices, an option or a pick that might not be a good fit for the story or the game that they're participating in. And overall, it gives players more control and agency inside of the game. So I do think that character retraining is a good inclusion in the rules. And though retraining is rare, I think as a storyteller it is a good idea that character retraining should be a default assumption and option for players. Now, when we talk about character retraining, I think the easiest way to understand character retraining is to divide it into three categories: minor retraining, major retraining, and extreme retraining. Minor retraining are things that characters can relatively easily out with just a little bit of time, effort, and money. Major retraining represents a significant shift not just in small aspects of a character, but in major pieces of that character's personality and identity. And then extreme retraining represents, well, to be honest, situations that should not normally get to be retrained. Only in the most extreme circumstances, or only with the most extreme of justifications, would that last category of retraining be a good option for the majority of stories. So let's talk about how Paizo classifies minor, major, and extreme retraining. Let's start with extreme. Paizo classifies ancestry choices, heritage choices, background choices, your character's class, and any ability score assignments as examples of extreme situations where retraining should not be a normal part of the rules. And if you think about this, retraining your character's ancestry is the kind of dramatic choice that would normally mess with a story. Going from a dwarf barbarian to an orc barbarian is a pretty extreme change, and without some significant justification could really break the immersion in the story. By the same token, your character's background represents the entire history of your character before they became an adventurer, and casually rewriting that on your character sheet, again, could really mess with the continuity of the story. And to be honest, a class rewrite is almost a rewrite of an entire character, So when you're making that big of a change to a character sheet, you're almost creating an entirely new character anyways. Finally, it's worth noting that Paizo says ability score reassignment has the potential to break the game and lead to situations where a character might be over-optimized for particular encounters, and so Paizo very strongly recommends against allowing ability score retraining. So those are the extreme examples of retraining, the situations where typically you're not going to want to let a PC retrain that aspect of their character. But let's step it down a notch to major examples of retraining that are feasible within a story but would still represent a lot of work and a major change for a character. Paizo here essentially gives us one example of a major retraining, and that is retraining a class feature. And with only a few exceptions, when Paizo says retraining a class feature, usually what that's going to mean is if a character wanted to retrain a subclass choice for their character. So imagine, if you will, a wizard who wanted to switch their arcane thesis, or imagine an alchemist who wanted to change their research field. The base of the character is still the same. Their class is still there, but they are changing such a major aspect of how their character interacts with that class that it represents a major change for the character. Class feature changes like this typically qualify as major changes. Now, as I've said, there are some exceptions to this. For example, the Monk Path to Perfection class features. This would also fall under a major example of retraining. But overall, there are not a lot of major examples of retraining. And when we move to the last category, the minor examples of retraining, we find that basically anything that is not an ancestry feat, a heritage, a background, a class feature, or an ability score, anything else is a minor example of retraining. So, general feats, skill increases, class feats, all of these things that are among the most common options that your players are going to be picking between, all of these things are considered minor examples of retraining. So you can see that Paizo has essentially stacked most of the common options for your characters on the minor end of the retraining scale. It has put a very small number of character options under major examples of retraining, and the extreme examples of retraining are mostly things that would just have a hard time fitting within a story. Okay, so now that we've talked about the scale that applies to different examples of retraining, now let's get a little more detailed and talk about the time, cost, and requirements associated with a character being able to retrain. Minor examples of retraining should normally take 1 week per character option that's being switched out. So if a character is replacing one skill feat with another skill feat, it takes 1 week in order to make that switch. By the same token, if a character would like to change out a class feat, that still is qualified as a minor example of retraining. So switching one class feat for another class feat, again, takes about 1 week to accomplish. If you step up to major examples of retraining, such as a character switching their subclass, the book recommends that it usually take a character about 1 month of retraining instead. So if a rogue wanted to switch their racket, they would probably spend about 1 month of downtime actively working on switching out their skills and abilities to move from their original racket to the new one. Now, it is worth noting that the scale of time involved in retraining can easily increase if a character would like to switch out multiple aspects of their character sheet. For example, imagine a character who wants to switch one of their skill increases and one of their skill feats to match that skill increase. Well, that's 2 changes, they're both minor changes, so in total it would probably take about 2 weeks to accomplish. Now, it is worth noting that these are ideal retraining scenarios. You can easily imagine a situation where a character isn't getting to study as much as they want to, or they're not getting to devote as much practice time as they might need to really absorb the lessons. And in those situations, a game master can rule that the training time might take longer. However, the core rulebook does recommend that you do kind of cap how long retraining might take, even in the most extreme of circumstances. So even in very extreme circumstances, a minor example of retraining should take no more than a month, and a major example of retraining should take no more than 4 months to accomplish. Next up, we have the cost associated with retraining, and Paizo works to keep the cost of retraining relatively cheap. Now, to figure out the cost, you will need to access the Earn Income table from the Pathfinder 2e core rulebook. It is table 4.2 and can be found on page 236 of the core rulebook. And basically what you want to do here is you want to check this table and figure out what level is associated with the item being retrained and what skill proficiency would be associated with the item being retrained. That gives you the daily cost of retraining, and then you just multiply out the days to figure out the total cost that a character might need to invest. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say you have a character who wants to switch out one of their skill proficiencies for the diplomacy skill. They want to become trained in diplomacy. Well, the proficiency associated with that is trained, that's what they're going for. And being trained in diplomacy is essentially a level 1 skill, so a character probably wouldn't have to seek out a particularly talented tutor for that kind of instruction. So if you were to look at a trained example of a level 1 Earn Income skill check, you would find that that produces about 2 silver a day. Multiply 2 silver times the 7-day training period, and you get an overall cost to the character of 14 silver, and at the end, the character could then switch out 1 skill and put diplomacy in its place. But let's go with a little bit of a more complex example. Let's say you have a character that wants to switch out one of their 8th level class feats. Let's say you have a monk who trained in the Tangled Forest stance, but they've decided that they would rather try out the Iron Blood stance class feat instead. Now, that is an 8th level class feat, so when you look at the Earn Income table, you would be going to 8th level, but then you have to decide which proficiency column you want to apply to this, and this is going to be basically a Game Master judgment call, but Master Proficiency usually shows up around level 7, and this is a level 8 class feat. Personally, I would say that it's fair to require that the teacher of this particular class feat have at least Master Proficiency in order to impart the appropriate instruction. So if you go to a Master Proficiency 8th level Earn Income check, you will find that it gives you about 3 gold per day. Again, multiply that out times the 7-day period, and the monk in question could spend 21 gold and a week's worth of downtime to switch out those 2 class feats. Now, on that last point, I kind of hinted at the last thing that you need to be aware of when you're dealing with retraining as a rule set, and that is what a character is going to need in order to retrain, and the only thing that is needed, the only requirement that Paizo gives us is a teacher. And if I'm being honest, teacher is in quotation marks here, because they really emphasize that what qualifies as a suitable teacher is really going to vary from character to character, story to story, and is even going to vary based on the circumstances of what a character might be trying to retrain. So in our previous example, the monk who is trying to master the Iron Blood stance class feat would very logically want to seek out a master who has learned that particular stance and could instruct them in the specifics of how to use it. In that case, when we say that the character needs a suitable teacher, that teacher would most likely be an NPC inside the story. However, you could also imagine that same monk going to an old library, purchasing some ancient scrolls for about the normal retraining cost, and then spending a week studying them to learn the long-forgotten Iron Blood stance. In this case, the suitable teacher might be the scrolls that the monk found instead. So when you hear the word teacher, realize that Paizo intends teacher to be a very flexible concept in terms of what your character needs in order to be able to learn the new skill or ability or option that they're trying to take. Now, it is worth noting that when you move from minor to major examples of retraining, that scaling up what qualifies as a suitable teacher could and maybe should be something that you want to do as a storyteller. For example, imagine a druid who wants to switch out their subclass, who wants to change from one order to another. Imagine a druid who wants to adopt the leaf order instead of the original order that they trained under. Now, since this is a major retraining, we can already imagine that they're probably going to spend at least a month in downtime doing it, but that question of what is a suitable teacher could come in the form of an ancient magical grove where the druid must meditate. It could come in the form of a number of small plant creatures that the druid must tend to for a period of time in order to come to understand and appreciate the tenets of the leaf order. The simple premise is this: as a character engages in more extreme versions of retraining, finding a suitable teacher could really be an opportunity to express some creativity and open up your story to some very unique situations or NPCs. Alright, so that kind of covers the main stuff that Paizo talks about when it comes to the idea of retraining, but there are a few other things that I'd like to go over really quick. One of them is the extreme examples of retraining, and basically the advice that Paizo gives here is if you want to allow a character to do an extreme example of retraining, switching an ancestry or a class or maybe moving around some ability scores, you probably want to find some very serious in-game justification for how that came about. A character who goes from the dwarf ancestry to the orc ancestry has probably been hit with some major magic or has been playing around with a really dangerous artifact. There should be something going on to justify these extreme changes. If you have some good justification inside of your story, it is something that you are allowed to do as a storyteller. If you and your player agree and feel like it's a good fit, you can open those options up when and where you think it's appropriate. The next thing I'd like to talk about is free retraining. The idea that as a game master, you can allow your players to essentially retrain at any time or at certain points for free. Now, this is also going to vary from table to table, but what I do personally with my players is I tell them from level 1 all the way up to level 5, they can retrain anything on their character sheet for free. No downtime, no money, no teacher. They can just decide when they level up, I did this instead. And I do this to give my players an opportunity to try out different versions of their characters and really get a taste for different options inside of the game before they kind of settle in and lock down on one particular version of the character that they want to portray. In my current campaign, I have one player who has gone from a halfling bard to a gnome playtest thaumaturge back to a halfling bard but with some different class feats, and it wasn't until level 5 that they settled on that halfling bard as the version of the character that they wanted to play. But because I let them jump around and try out a bunch of different options, when they finally settled on that version of the build, they were much happier with it because they knew that it was the best fit with what they were going for. Another thing Paizo briefly mentions on the subject of retraining is offering time or money discounts for characters who are doing a lot of retraining that might fall under a similar umbrella. For example, if a character is retraining into the diplomacy skill and retraining so that they have a diplomacy skill feat, you might give them a discount in the overall time, cost, or both in getting that retraining taken care of because functionally they would be working on both of those things at the same time. But that was a quick look at the rest and retraining rules for Downtime Mode in Pathfinder 2e. So I think the time has come to turn the conversation over to you. What are your thoughts about rest? And more importantly, what are your thoughts about the storytelling opportunities that come with retraining rules? Do you like the retraining rules? And have you used them at your gaming table? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. Both are linked in the video description. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day.